Have you ever noticed we make rules for family? You probably growing up had some family rules in your household, and if you've ever had kids, and you would have probably put some rules into place for your kids. When I had Azalea, our number one, we put some funny rules in because you don't know what you don't know. And at the time we thought to ourselves, these are reasonable rules that we should have in place for a 1-year-old. One day we were at a play centre, Mighty Jungle in Morley, and there is little Azalea. She's probably she's just twaddling around just over a year. And she took something from another kid. And I said to myself, that is not how we do this. And she probably just thought, this looks great. I don't think she really had anything in her brain at the time. She other than, explore, have fun. And I thought to myself, no, this isn't right. So I went up and I said to Azalea, and I said, this is not how we do it. And I told her off or whatever I was doing at the time. And we were talking through it. And as I was telling Azalea, hey, this is not what we do, the other parent did something which to their mind was just relieving the tension, but to me at the time was incredibly unhelpful. They said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It's fine. My kids, and now that I have 4 kids, I get where that parent was coming from. But as a first-time parent, I was like, no, my kid needs to learn. These are the rules. But according to that parent, my kid's level of rules was not really needed to be applied to their kids' level of rules. And they were just saying they're fine. Now, as I said, I realized as time went on, the rules got a little bit looser, and I realized the goal is not to have the best rules. The goal is not to have perfect behavior, because that's what we try to do when we put rules in place. We want to modify behavior. The goal is not perfect behavior. It's all about relationship. We don't have kids because we have this great set of rules and we think to ourselves, you know what? These set of rules need some children to obey them. That's not how we do family. You have kids and you think to yourselves, we need to have some standards around here. So you put in rules into place. But you put rules in there because you love them, because you want what's best for them. But you only ever put rules on your kids. And when you try to go put rules onto another family, onto other families' kids, onto other kids, it doesn't work. And we're going to talk about that today. So if you haven't been with us, I want to catch you up because we are in part 3 of Heaven, Who Goes There? And if you've missed the first couple of weeks, I just want to make sure you've got the scope of what we've looked at. In week 1, looking at this idea of heaven, who goes there, we talked about the idea, is it that good people go to heaven? And in which case, what does it mean to be good enough to make it to heaven? And we looked at this idea around, it sounds fair, it sounds reasonable. If there is something for us after this life when we die, it seems reasonable that good people should go to that place. And we all assume we've made it. We're good enough because we look and we compare down generally. But we scratched beneath the surface in week 1 and we realized that this idea of good enough doesn't quite work. For a few reasons. One, the idea and the concept of good keeps shifting. Good changes culturally, changes with time. In fact, if we think about our own lives, what we would say is good now or good enough behavior now, we may have shifted from when we were younger as time goes on. And we also realize that if it is good enough that gets you into heaven, it would be really, really helpful if God told us what good enough was. So we realize this idea of being good enough doesn't quite work and doesn't leave us in a space of peace. Then in week 2, we looked at the idea that Jesus did come along to earth and then he defined the standard of, okay, well, this is what good enough looks like. And unhelpfully, Jesus showed us that what it meant to be good enough was to be perfect, to which everybody fails the perfect test. The way Jesus defined living perfectly is that we live in complete harmony with the people around us, and we never sin. We never break relationship with the people around us. And all of us have broken relationship with people in our lives. We've lied to people. We've gossiped about people. From when we are kids through to our adult life, through to right now, there are moments we look back at and we go, oh, I broke relationship with them. We sinned against them. We broke that relationship. And Jesus said, well, the good enough thing for God is perfection, to which everybody fails. But he didn't leave us there. We looked at this last week. Jesus defined good enough as being perfect, recognized that no one can reach it, and then took our place and stood in the gap and said, I will do this for you. And now today, we're going to have a look at the system and the rules that have been given around us. Because if it's not about good enough, and if Jesus takes our place because perfection is the standard, a question which arises, well, why are there so many rules in the Bible? And why does it seem like, especially if you've not really dug into the Bible much, it seems like the only thing that's in the Bible is rules upon rules upon rules. As you start to read it, you see the narratives and you see the stories come alive and everything. But given most of the perception around how Christians treat the world around them, it seems like the Bible is a rule book, and this rule book has to be followed by everybody. But the problem with rules is that we cannot earn our way. So then the rules aren't a mechanism for us to earn our way anywhere. Because if we know good enough is not the standard, and we know that Jesus put it as perfection, and we have all these rules, we already know we're going to be rule breakers because we're never going to be able to live it out perfectly. And if Jesus has already paid the price, then why do we need to have all these rules? Why 10 commandments? Why the Sermon on the Mount? Why all these shall and shall nots, thou and thou nots? Why is there all of these rules in the Bible if the rules can't earn you a way to heaven? Maybe the problem isn't with the rules, but how we perceive the role of the rules in our lives. And if we use the rules as obey them perfectly and we'll get to go somewhere good when we die, we miss the point of why they've been given to us, why they have been expressed. So we have to go way, way back to the story of the Israelites leaving Egypt to get an idea around why is it that the people who follow God have rules in the first place. So I'll do my best to sort of give an overview of this story. Long, long, long ago, like when you're at a movie and it's like in a time far, all that, like long ago, just imagine it. Long ago, there's a guy called Abram. And God chose this person. So I'm going to name you Abraham, and I'm going to do two things for you, all right? I'm going to make you famous, and you are going to help the world. And Abraham went, that sounds pretty good. So God picked him up, and he said, you're going to be a great nation. You're going to be the people that represent me on this earth. You're going to have a connection with me as your God, and you're going to go around, and all of the nations around you are going to be better off because you exist. And he went, sweet. And it only took 3 generations for that to run into some problems. So Abraham's great-grandson, a guy called Joseph, ended up leaving the land which God had said, this is your land, you're going to be a great nation. And he took the people to Egypt. Now, he was sent there on a scouting mission unwillingly by his brothers. But eventually he went back, grabbed the family. There was famine in the land. They went and stayed with him in Egypt. They went, this is working out pretty well. So they stayed there. And then generation after generation grew up in the land of Egypt. And this is what happened. About 400 years they were in Egypt. And these people who were picked by God to be this great nation, who were going to let all the nations around them be better off because they exist, got enslaved. And the reason they got enslaved is because they multiplied really quickly, and the people in charge at the time wanted to control what was happening, saw this great population of people who were descendants of Abraham. They would just multiplying, and they said, we need to control this, otherwise they're going to take over. And what do people who are in control do when they are threatened? They enslave, they coerce, they control, they try to put their hands into the situation so that it doesn't move away from them because they're afraid. So 400 years of Abraham's family being in Egypt, multiplying, and eventually they are just enslaved. And this is not the promise that was given. They were promised, name great, helping the nations. Yet here they are, trapped in the land of Egypt with no hope, totally enslaved. So God says, I've got to do something about this. And he chooses at his appointed time to pick a man named Moses to go up and to bring hope to the people of Israel so that they can be free again. And what ensues is this epic battle of which some great movies have been made and some great songs have been sung about, where Moses goes and represents one God, the God of Israel, and goes up against the Egyptian pantheon of gods, and one after one defeats them. And then the people are freed. And it's in this incredible scene where the Egyptians eventually say, we do not want you here anymore. You need to go. Your God is so strong. Our gods have been beaten and we want you out of this land. So through the power of God and through a moment there where they symbolized with blood of a lamb over their doors, that they are belonging to God. After all that happens, they get to leave. Now, here's the problem. They have spent the last 400 years enslaved. So when this nation finally leaves Egypt and they're standing around, there's one question on everyone's mind. Now what? They don't have any rules in place. They don't have any governance systems going on. They have no moral framework really functioning at this point in time. They are free and they do not know what freedom looks like because they have lost that when they were living in Egypt for so long. So God says, all right, I am going to show you how to live as free people. And what God does is he gets Moses and he gives him 10 commandments. And he puts them on these 2 really cool stones. And then Moses goes back to the people. He says, hey guys, I got these really cool stones. And he goes, hang on a minute. And he breaks the stones. He has to go back up again. He gets some more ones. And basically Moses comes back and he says, here's how we now live as free people. God has given us 10 commandments, 10 ways, which we are going to make a lot more rules off of, but they're going to be the central thing that we base all of this on. Now, the first 4 are all about how they love God. The next 6 are about how they love people. But the key that we need to bear in mind is simply this. The rules were given after the relationship had already been formed. The rules were not given so that they could earn it, so they could be in relationship with God. They were already in relationship with God. God didn't say, if you obey me, I'll make you my people. He said, look, you are already my people. I've rescued you, and if you want to stay free, here's the way you go about it. So before God ever said, don't steal, don't kill, don't covet, he said this in Exodus 20. He said, I'm the Lord your God. I brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You're already my people. I love you already. I've brought you out of that space. And now to remain free, this is how you live out with these rules. The rules were not a condition of the relationship. They were evidence of the fact the relationship had been formed. They weren't given to earn freedom. In fact, the rules were given to protect the freedom. Because how easy would it have been for them to leave their place of slavery, to go and become a nation and then say, you know what? Those who were in power within that group could have said, hey, that whole slave thing sucked when I was a slave. But if I was the one in charge, this might go all right. How quick would it have been for them to be able to go and form, copying what they already had and putting it in place with their own people? And God said, you're not going to do that. Here's how you're going to live. And the truth that God gives us is that the relationship that was formed between God and Israel was formed because of God's choice to choose them as his people. And then he gave them the rules to keep them free. They didn't behave their way into the relationship. They were already in the relationship. And what's true for Israel is true for us. So now that's the story of Israel. Freed and given these rules, and then 1400 years later, Jesus enters the picture. Now, when Jesus enters the picture, there's this great story where he's celebrating Passover. Passover is the celebration of when they were enslaved and then finally they became free. They do it every year and they remember we were once slaves, we are no longer going back to being enslaved again, and we're going to celebrate what God did on our behalf. And they've been doing this for 1400 years in different ways through culture. So in the middle of this meal, to remember this moment of amazing rescue of God, Jesus does something. He stands up, he's got his closest friends, and he says something which, if he had led with this at the beginning of his time with them, because this is at the end of his time with his close friends, if he had opened with this, I do not think any of them would have followed him. But because over 3 years he'd showed them miracles, incredible teaching, close friendship, and journeyed with them, when he said this, they stuck around. But they wouldn't have if he started with this. He's in the middle of this meal, remembering back when God had rescued them, and he says these words. He gets a cup of wine. And he says, this cup is the new agreement between God and humanity, and it has my blood, which is going to be poured out for you. Now, when you read that, unless you're Jewish and have gone through Passover traditions, it's a bit hard to understand how big of a statement that is. Jesus is making this whole rescue thing all about him. To try and give us a modern day equivalent, it would be like at Christmas time, I rock up on the 1st of December and say, all right, everyone, Christmas was about celebrating the birth of baby Jesus. It's now about celebrating the birth of baby Josh. Who's with me? To which you all go, that poor guy has lost his marbles. You would think that's not how it's done. So he's standing there, and Jesus is saying, that thing we celebrated, God rescuing the people of Israel, I am now going to be the one who's going to rescue the world through me. That story about the blood of the Lamb that was put over your door so that you would be seen to be part of God's people, I'm now going to spill my blood so that everyone can be saved. This is just, the real thing has been given. The preview is gone. So, it sounds insane and it sounds crazy that Jesus would have that sort of power to go and take this incredible ancient story and make it all about him. But then he goes, dies on a cross, and comes back to life. To which point, everyone at that who saw him, the 500 who saw him, are like, okay, we saw the miracles, amazing. We heard the teaching, powerful. We saw how he spoke to the religious institution, the way he lifted up the broken and put those who felt they were self-righteous in their place. That was all good. But then he came back to life. And their whole framework for what is up and down and left and right went out the door. And suddenly, Jesus' claim to make this ancient, historic rescue plan of God all about him made perfect sense. And ever since that moment, the world has never been the same. So Jesus rises from the dead, and his followers start to write down everything, and they start to write down some ways of living when you're part of this new family of God. In the same way that God rescued the people from Israel and made them his family, in the same way that he made that promise to Abraham, Jesus has now made a promise with humanity on God's behalf through God to say that everyone who believes in him is restored and part of his family now. So the people who are now part of his family are going around and they're writing stuff down. They're seeing incredible things. They're seeing communities lifted up. They're seeing people's lives changed. And one of the results is that they wrote a whole bunch of things around how do we now live now that we are part of this community. And it looks an awful lot like rules. Now, they weren't writing it as a rule book on how to get in. They were writing it as a way of saying, now that you're already part of God's family, this is how we live. It's sort of like when you go to a new work site and you get inducted, you rock up and you get your little badge and you roll in, you sit down and they play a video with a really uninspired person at the front looking their feet because they've seen it 1,500 times. And, like if you've been on work sites like that, and you're there and you're getting inducted into this work site and they say, look, I don't know how you did things at your old work, but here at Global Express Australia United, this is how we do things. And they give you rules. They give you ways to behave. They show you this is our framework. And some of it looks similar to your old workplace, but then there's things that you go, no, this is new, this is different. This is for my new workplace. So in that same way, the people who are writing these documents down are saying, hey, you used to live one way. To some people, they were writing these stories to those who were already Jewish and believed in God. To others, they were writing it to people who had no faith in God, but were coming to believe in Jesus through the community of God. And they're writing all of these things down to say that now that you're part of God's family, this is how we live. This is what we do. This is how we talk. Because you're in the family, we live differently. Not as an earning thing. That was never part of the equation. You don't live this way so that you earn your way into the community. You're part of the community. But this is how we do it here. So then if the rules don't get us in, why are there so many rules? Because they're never a way in. They're just how we live once we're in. Why are there so many of them? The Bible has been put together to show this is how the family of God operates. And it's beautiful. And it sets standards and it gives us stories and it shows us this is how it is that we are meant to live now that we are part of God's family. You might be thinking to yourself, how do I become part of God's family? If I am someone on the outside and I'm looking in And okay, Josh, I believe there's these rules and everything, but they're for the family members. How is it that I become part of that family? Because all of us can put our hands up and say we belong to a family. It may be a dysfunctional family, it may be a functional family, it may be a happy family, a sad family, but all of us were born into a family of which we had no choice. Luck of the draw. For whatever reason, you were born where you were born to the people that you were born to. So how is it you go from your earthly family, being born here on this earth, how do you join this new family? How does that even work? How does that even operate? And luckily for us, Jesus had a really important conversation with a guy called Nicodemus, and he explained this really well. So Jesus is talking to Nicodemus, who is a religious leader. He does this in John chapter 3. And he's talking to Nicodemus about some truths. And Nicodemus's question is basically, all right, how do we inherit this kingdom of God then? He's a religious leader. He hears what Jesus is saying. How do we inherit it? How do we be part of what's going on? He met with Jesus at night time when he had this conversation. It could be because he was a little afraid of maybe some of the, some of what it looked like to be standing with Jesus, because if you're standing next to someone who other people don't like, maybe they won't like you. And the religious institution, we're watching Jesus very carefully. So maybe he was cautious. He thought, I'm going to see him at night. Or perhaps maybe there were just lots of crowds in the day and he thought, this guy's calendar is full, so I'm going to sneak in at night and go that way. We're not 100% sure, but for whatever reason, they're there at night time having this conversation. And Nicodemus says, how? How do we be part of this? And Jesus says these words. Jesus says, how do you be part of this kingdom? How do you be part of this family? You got to be born again. You have to be born again. You don't behave again. Born again. You have to be born into God's family. When you believe in Jesus, when you take him at his word, and you believe that he is the Son of God, that he is the Lord of your life, you're not signing up for some moral improvement program. You're actually being born into a new family, spiritually. You're being released into a new family, the family of God. And once you are family, the rules shift from a requirement to a response. They're not what keep you in. The rules don't keep you in as part of God's family. You are already a son or a daughter once you are born again, once you believe in Jesus. What rules do is they keep you free while you're being part of the family. So saying the rules keep you connected to God, it's sort of like saying, well, my kids who I gave birth to, they're connected to me, but if they ever mess up on that one thing, they're out. That doesn't happen with good parents. Now, I know some of us have experienced with bad parents. You do that one thing and you're out of the will or whatever. But that's not a good reflection of God as a good father. So the rules aren't what connect us to God. We are connected to God because we are part of his family. We have been born again. The relationship is what matters, and nothing changes the relationship status. So the rules are there to keep us free. Just like Israel was trapped in Egypt and they were enslaved by Pharaoh and they had rules thrust upon them and they ended up in a place of enslavement. God said, here are the rules for you so that you don't become trapped again. Now, it looks different for us. We don't have the chance of being enslaved physically, but for many of us, we can end up being enslaved in shame or fear, or through gossip and envy or anger or lust or isolation. There are things that can trap us in this life. So God's rules don't confine us. They liberate us so that we don't get enslaved again. So the role of rules is to protect our freedom as children of God. And as we come to close, I just want to talk to a few groups of people as we finish up. So, some of you who are listening to this right now, you followed Jesus and you think to yourself, yeah, I have not done a great job at keeping the rules. Maybe you feel like you've slipped or fallen or wandered far away from God, and you have this feeling inside like, I believe in Jesus, but I reflect over how I've lived the past few months, years, or decades. You think to yourself, I don't know if I'm part of the family. The thing I want to say to you 100% with confidence is that there is no way that you've been kicked out of God's family. You can't. You've been born again. You are part of his family. You are God's child. You may become enslaved by habits or hurts of this earth, but you cannot lose your identity as a child of God. You never stop being his. So if that's you and you're thinking to yourself, I've not done a good job at following the rules, know that you are still his child. And those rules are not there so you feel like you've earned your spot in the family. They are there to help you while you act as part of the family, to not be entrapped by the things of this earth. So just hear that very clearly. Once saved, always saved. For some of you, you followed Jesus for a while, but you haven't jumped up here and been baptized or been baptized in your own setting. Perhaps now is the time to consider, is baptism right for me? So what is baptism? Baptism is where we fill up over here with some water and we get you to come up here and share your story of following Jesus, and then you follow what Jesus did 2,000 years ago and you get into some water over here and we put you under the water and bring you up. And what it does is it symbolizes that the old life is gone and the new life with Jesus is here. It's a way of publicly sharing, I believe in Jesus and I belong to his family. For some of you, baptism is a step. It's not the finish line, but it's definitely a part of the journey. And now for some of you, and I say this very politely because I've done this as well in the past, you follow Jesus, but you really have this thing in you that you want to try and tell other people how to follow the rules of God. And they are not even part of God's family. So if you've ever felt tempted as a parent to discipline someone else's kid, how did that go? Poorly, right? Some of us love Jesus and we are passionate about the amazing system he has put in place. Yet we go to people who do not subscribe to that system and we say, you have to live this way. And I think what Jesus and what Paul would say is, don't do that. Keep your thoughts up here and live your life out here. Paul has this really great verse in 1 Thessalonians that says this. It says, make it your ambition. So make it your goal. Center yourself on this. To lead a quiet life. Some of you didn't even know that was in the Bible. You should go read the New Testament. It's an amazing verse. Some of you have never heard that verse before and you're thinking, that is great. I wish the people in the past I interacted with had heard that verse. They were really loud and really annoying. So make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. Mind your own business. Isn't that great? Thank you, Paul. And work with your hands so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders. Putting your rules, your family rules, onto someone who is not a part of your family does not, cannot, and will not work. And some of you inside are like, amen. And some of you are like, what do you mean? Let me explain it this way. You cannot discipline someone else's child. And God is the one who is the good father. And he allows us to live within his rules. But for us to go and take our framework and to put it over the top of those who have not agreed to it is just not right. We need to be quiet, live well, and let our lives speak. That's how we win people. That's how we do it. It's through relationship and compassion, not control. It drives me nuts in the moment. It's the only time I'll mention America ever from here. But it drives me nuts when the church in America wants to put the 10 Commandments everywhere. I'm just like, stop trying to put the rules onto that. Just be the church, love the people, and allow that to speak life. I see it in Parliament here as well in our system where we're trying to get rules on other people and it's like, that's not how we do it. You're allowed to stand up for what you believe. There's nothing wrong with that. But to want others to buy into a system that they haven't bought into, it's just not right and it does not win people over. So, if you're not a Christian or if you've been hurt by a Christian, I just want to say, we get this wrong and it's on us. And I'm really sorry that that's happened. We try to enforce rules without building relationship. And instead, what happens is it's almost like the church becomes a moral police rather than the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. And that is just not the Jesus way. With God, relationship always preceded the rules. So we take our cue from God and Israel. We take our cue from Jesus and the cross. It is relationship first, rules second. So if someone's ever forced their rules on you, instead of offering you love, That is just not the heart of our Father. And that is not right. So, let's bring it home. Heaven, who goes there? Forgiven people do. Week 1, we saw that good enough is a lie. Week 2, we saw that Jesus showed us the standard is perfection and everyone fails the test, and God did the only fair thing and sent Jesus to stand in our place. And today we looked at this. Rules are not how we earn our way into the family. They are what are given to the family so that we can live free here and now. So I want to say this as we finish. You are not one rule, one loophole, or one perfect week away from heaven. You're one act of trust away from being born into a good, gracious, and loving family. And when you're in that family, the rules don't hold you back. They set you free. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the rules. But thank you that they are given to keep us free from being enslaved again. Thank you that we cannot earn our way back to you. It is purely by grace, your decision to be active and move in our direction, that we are able to be born again and be part of your new family. And we say thank you for that. I pray right now that we receive that message and that we transfer our trust from us to you, from our effort to what you've already done, from who we are and what we can do to who you are and what you've done on our behalf. Be with us today and always. Amen.